Welcome back to the channel. Sorry it's been a while since I've posted. Between work and the weather I've just not had much chance to get out with the cameras, but anyway, I'm back and today I'm talking to you about the 650Bs that I've fitted to the Cannondale Topstone. So if you're familiar with the channel, you'll have seen the Topstone already. I bought it, bought the base model, 899 quid. I fitted Shimano GRX to it and I really enjoyed building it. I've custom painted it, really wanted to love the bike. I was going to build it into a sort of gnarly gravel bike off-roader, but like I said in one of the last videos, I just found it pretty underwhelming. The comfort of it was just shocking. The rear end of the bike, with it being an alloy frame and probably not a lot of tech gone into it, it was just really harsh at the rear. So I've not ridden it for a long time and got a bit bored and thought I'll sell it. And then I've decided I'll give it one last shot and I'll buy some 650Bs, see if it makes any difference. And I'm pleased to say it's made a massive difference. So let me talk you through them. The reason I've gone from a 700C, which in mountain bike language is a 29er, to a 650B, which is a 27.5, is to give me more tyre clearance. So obviously on a mountain bike, to roll over gnarlier stuff, you choose a bigger wheel. On a gravel bike, we can't fit a bigger tyre on than a sort of 38, 43 I had on before with a 700C, and it was still too uncomfortable. So the whole purpose on a gravel bike of going 650B for off-road is to go a smaller wheel to give you a bigger volume of air in your tyre, and it has worked. So that extra cushioning of air, I've got the same tyre by the way, a Panaracer Gravel King. I thought I'll keep that the same so it's a fair test, and I've got the same pressure, 30 psi, and that extra cushioning of air makes such a difference. There's just so much more spring in it. If you hit a rock, it's not like creasing the tyre casing and hitting the rim, so it just feels a lot more comfortable, definitely more capable. The other effect it's had fitting 650Bs, which are a smaller rolling circumference, is that it's kind of geared me up. So now I'm climbing better. It does get a bit tricky when you're on technical gnarly climbs and you're clipped in and you're hitting boulders and your cadence slows. And with Shimano GRX not being the best for climbing, you're already quickly out of gears as soon as you start to hit anything sort of above 20%. The other effect it's had fitting that smaller wheel is it's altered the trail. So I'll explain more when I get back in the studio what the trail is. But basically by shortening the fork trail speeds up the steering, so it's still nice and stable, don't get me wrong, it's not jolting around all over the place when I'm on rough stuff. But now when you lean it into a corner, the steering feels much more alive, and I've hit kind of a sweet spot between this stem length, frame size and that 650B. Means that it feels a lot like a road bike now. So yeah, again another tick. There's only a couple of slight negatives which I'll take you through when I get back. For now, I'm going to enjoy the rest of this cycleway. So now that I'm back in the studio, I'll take you through some more technical details about the wheel set, why it's made such a big difference, and some pros and cons. The wheel set is Fulcrum's Rapid Red 900. It's their gravel specific entry-level wheel set. I got them from Merlin Cycles. They cost me about 170 quid. When you see gravel specific rims, it's talking about inner rim width. So the inner rim width of the new wheels is 23mm, and when you compare that to the wheel set that came with the bike, they're only 19. So that's an important upgrade because it means you can fit wider tyres and they're going to take the correct shape. So we know we've increased the inner rim width, we've got a wider tyre, deeper profile, and we've got a bigger volume of air. So there's a much better cushion for us to ride on, and there's more support, it's more springy rather than soggy. But what other benefits does the 650B wheel set give you? So the 650B is obviously a smaller wheel set, but I was unsure if by fitting that big tyre, it would have the same overall rolling circumference, and I've left the rear mudguard on to show you the difference in the size. So originally the 700Cs filled out that mudguard, and now we've got daylight underneath it, so it's definitely a smaller rolling circumference. Now that makes a couple of differences, one to the gearing and another to the trail. So first of all, the gearing. So a smaller wheel is easier to spin up, so it's going to accelerate better and effectively gives you another climbing gear. So I've done the number crunching and the nerdy stuff, and I've gone from basically a 42 cog at the back to, just by fitting the smaller wheel set, to effectively having a 44. So I've gained an extra climbing gear. That extra gear is actually a really big tick from me because I enjoy climbing techie climbs which are really steep, loose terrain, clipped in. I like the challenge of it, but the Shimano GRX group set I've fitted doesn't really lend itself for that. I mean, whereas other group sets you can fit a 38 or a 36 even front ring, and up to a mountain bike rear mech and up to a 50 cassette, the GRX is out of gears pretty quick because the minimum you can get on the front is a 40 and the maximum on the back is a 42. So by effectively having a 44 gear, just by fitting the 650Bs, is actually made the climbing more fun and a little bit safer. So especially if you clipped in and there's a drop to either side, it just makes me feel a bit more comfortable and I can keep that cadence spinning. So the disadvantage to that is by gaining a gear at the low end, you lose a gear at the high end. So at top speeds on roads, technically, it's not going to be as quick. But honestly, in the real world, I've not noticed that. I mean, gravel bikes are not known for the speed anyway on road, and with a one by group set, I'm usually pedaling silly cadence at like 50k, so it's not really bothered me. I can still reach those speeds on them. They're not a very light wheel set, so they've probably got a similar weight to originally, so inertia wise they're going to spin probably just as well once they're up to speed. But yeah, technically this should roll slower than a 700C wheel set, but like I say, real world, I can't really tell a difference. The other thing that changes when you fit 650Bs is the handling, and that's because you've shortened the trail. So to explain a little bit more about what the trail is, if you drew a line through the centre of the steerer tube and marked that where it'd end up on the floor, and then draw a line from the centre of the hub and mark that on the floor, that distance in between is the trail. A bike with a longer trail is going to be more stable off-road, so the steering is going to be slower, and especially on a gravel bike, if you're hitting rocks and bumpy terrain, the steering is going to be nice and stable and predictable. On a cyclocross bike, if you're on slippy surfaces, you're going to feel the steering go and be able to correct it. On a road bike, for instance, it would have a much shorter trail. The steering would be really sharp, but it would be very twitchy if it was off-road or it slips. So by shortening the trail, I've actually sped up the steering. Although the steering is now quicker, it's still very stable. So the initial turning is exactly the same, and that's all down to the head angle. So if the bike's upright and you're on gnarly terrain, the steering is not jolting around everywhere. It's still really focused and really forgiving. But as soon as you start to lean the bike over, the steering's much more alive and feels much more like a road bike, and I really like that feeling. I've hit a bit of a sweet spot, like I say, between the stem length, which also a shorter stem quickens the steering up, so the stem length, the frame size, my position over the bars, and now that 650B wheel set, it all works really well together. And as soon as you start leaning over on something like a country bend or sweeping bends, it feels really alive and really nice and lively. So negatives, what negatives are there? There are a few, so they're worth pointing out. The first one is obviously losing the gearing at the top end, which we've mentioned, but put that aside, it's not a huge deal. In the real world, you don't really miss it. What you do notice is the width of the tyres. So going from a 38 tyre to then a 43 and now a 48, I've definitely crossed over into mountain bike feel when you get on a road. They're really draggy. And would I take that bike now on a 50-mile ride if half of it's on road or 2/3 on road? Probably not. So that's worth considering. It's still more fun than riding a mountain bike on road, because at least you've got the road posture. You can get down on the drops, you can get out of wind somewhat, so it's not like being on a mountain bike on those road sections where they just seem to drag on forever and you sat up in the wind. But it's definitely a lot slower, so you've got to be patient. For me, to solve that problem, I tend to ride out on road with a tailwind, and then I come back into wind, but through woodlands and valleys, and dodge the wind really that way. So it works for me. But like I say, on a 50-mile circuit where you're going to be exposed to wind and stuff, you could get pretty bored because it's a lot slower. Another one is the clearance at the front end has gone now, so I've had to take the front mudguards off. But those mudguards were really designed for wet winter roads, not for gnarly terrain like you'd be hitting on a mountain bike. So by fitting those wheels, you've got to accept that you've crossed over into another category of getting really deeply off-road, and mudguards don't belong there. I mean, there's nothing to stop you fitting a mountain bike style mudguard, but certainly the full road mudguards have to go once you start fitting these wheels. And after this video, the rear one will be going. And then the final point is the brake setup. So just bear this in mind, especially if you're not a DIY mechanic. You can't just buy this wheel set, throw it on your bike and expect it to work properly, because it's all about the rotors. With it being a disc brake bike, the rotor position can change. So changing wheel brands, I've gone from a 6-bolt rotor to a wheel set that has a centre lock rotor. I had some spare centre lock rotors, so I put those on, and they were probably, the offset was a bit different, probably about 1 to 2 mils. So obviously the caliper had to be recentered. By the time I'd recentered it, I had to switch out the pads. That meant that the material from the pads had to bed in on a rotor which has had other brake pads on. Anyway, I finished up with a bit of a mare where they're squealing and squeaking. You've probably heard in the video. They're not as powerful as they were, but I'm sure they'll clean up, and I'm sure the setup's right now. It's just about getting the pads, laying some material down on that rotor. It might be slightly contaminated or something, but yeah, just bear in mind that if you don't like messing around with disc brakes, then take it to your local bike shop, get them to fit your wheels, and make sure that the calipers are nicely squarely set up against that new rotor position at least. So do you need to do the upgrade? It's going to cost you about 250 quid for wheels, tyres and the 6-bolt to centre lock rotor adapters. Well, it depends what you're riding. I mean, if you're on canal paths, cycleways, perfectly smooth gravel, then no, not really. Stick to the original wheels. Even the 38mm tyres that come with the bike, they'll do you absolutely fine. If you're like me, on the other hand, and you're a little bit crazy and want to take a gravel bike where a gravel bike doesn't belong, then do the upgrade. But joking apart, I ride my hardtail mountain bike, and I think my gravel bike could probably handle most of this. So that's what the purpose of that thing's been. I want to get out into the middle of nowhere. I'm going to get stuck at some point. I'm going to get laughed at by a walker or a mountain biker for being in road bike gear in the middle of nowhere. But you know, that's all part of the fun. I don't take myself too seriously. I think you can have a lot of fun and adventure on these bikes, and for 250 quid, it's going to be well worth it for me. So if you want to see all that stuff, then subscribe, hit the like button. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.